The laughter echoed off the hand-painted ceiling of l'Orangerie, sharp and cruel. It belonged to Sheikh Omar al-Hassan, a man whose net worth could buy a small country, and it was directed entirely at the waitress trembling by his table. He thought she was invisible. He thought she was just a pair of hands serving vintage champagne. He looked at his associates and mocked her intelligence in a dialect he was certain she couldn't understand. But then the waitress raised her head. The trembling stopped. She didn't just speak. She dismantled his entire world in 6 perfectly fluent languages. The laughter died instantly. What she revealed next would force a billionaire to his knees. The dinner rush at l'Orangerie was not merely a service, it was a military operation disguised as a ballet. Located in the beating heart of Manhattan, just a block from Central Park, the restaurant was the kind of place where the menu had no prices, and if you had to ask for a reservation, you didn't belong there. Madeline Hart adjusted the collar of her stiff white uniform. At 26, she possessed a face that was striking but carefully hidden behind severe glasses, and hair pulled back so tightly it ached. To the patrons of l'Orangerie, she was a non-entity. She was a utensil, no different from the silver forks or the crystal flutes she polished until they gleamed. "Table 4 is yours, Hart," the maître d', a nervous man named Philip, hissed as he passed her. "And for the love of God, don't make eye contact unless summoned. It's the Al-Hassan party." Madeline's eyes flickered. The Al-Hassan family. Old oil money mixed with new tech investments, specifically Sheikh Omar al-Hassan. He was currently dominating the business tabloids for a hostile takeover of a European renewable energy firm, a deal rumored to be worth $40 billion. "Understood," Madeline said softly. Her voice was low, melodic, and entirely wasted on saying things like sparkling or still. She moved through the dining room with practiced grace. The air smelled of truffle oil, searing wagyu, and expensive perfume, notes of Chanel No. 5 and oud wood. Table 4 was the prime spot, located in a semi-private alcove with a view of the city skyline. 5 men sat there. They were loud, their postures relaxed with the arrogance of men who owned the chairs they sat in. In the center was Sheikh Omar. He was younger than his photos suggested, perhaps in his late 30s, wearing a bespoke Brioni suit that cost more than Madeline's entire year of rent. As she approached with the water pitcher, the conversation halted. It was a power move, waiting for the servant to leave before resuming the affairs of masters. "Sparkling, gentlemen?" Madeline asked, keeping her eyes lowered. "Water. Ice." "Lemon," one of the associates barked, not looking up from his phone. He was a heavy-set American named Robert, a fixer for the firm. Madeline poured. As the liquid chimed against the crystal, Omar leaned back, lighting a cigar despite the strict no-smoking laws of New York City. At l'Orangerie, the law was merely a suggestion for men like him. "So," Omar said, switching from English to a rapid-fire, colloquial French. "Tell me, Robert, is the German regulatory board going to be an issue? I don't have the patience for bureaucrats." Robert, whose French was clumsy and schoolboyish, nodded. "We are handling it, Omar. The bribes, the lobbying fees are in place." Madeline didn't flinch. She finished pouring the water. Her face remained a mask of indifference. But inside, her mind was racing. German Regulatory Board, the Heidelberg acquisition. She knew exactly what they were talking about, because she read the Financial Times every morning before her shift. Omar took a drag of his cigar and exhaled a cloud of blue smoke toward Madeline. He switched languages again, this time to Italian, addressing the man on his left, a sleek lawyer named Giovanni. "Look at her," Omar said in Italian, gesturing vaguely at Madeline with his cigar. "A ghost. You could discuss a murder in front of her, and she would only ask if you wanted cracked pepper. Giovanni chuckled, swirling his wine. She's probably thinking about her rent, or which reality TV show to watch tonight. These people, they have no interior lives, Omar. Madeline's hand tightened on the silver pitcher. The cold metal bit into her palm. These people. She had a PhD in comparative linguistics from Cambridge. She had spent 3 years as a translator for the UN before the incident, the scandal that had destroyed her father's reputation and forced her into anonymity. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a vault of silenced potential. "Is there anything else, sir?" Madeline asked in English, her voice perfectly flat. Omar looked at her, amusement dancing in his dark eyes. He switched to German, testing the waters, mocking the very concept that she might understand. "Bring us the 82 Petrus," he said in German, "and try not to drop it. It's worth more than your life." Madeline paused. It would be so easy. She could answer in German. She could correct his pronunciation of Petrus. But she needed this job. Her father's medical bills were astronomical, and the cash tips at l'Orangerie were the only thing keeping him in the private care facility upstate. She swallowed her pride. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't catch that. Could you repeat it in English?" The table erupted in laughter. It was an ugly sound, rich with condescension. "English?" Omar sneered, switching back. "I said, bring us the Chateau Petrus. 1982. Go." "Yes, sir." Madeline retreated to the kitchen, her heart hammering against her ribs. She wasn't angry. She was used to the invisibility. But there was something different about tonight. The way they spoke about the German deal. It wasn't just business. There was an edge of desperation in Robert's voice, a cruelty in Omar's eyes that suggested this wasn't just a takeover. It was a crime in progress. In the kitchen, Philip was pacing. "Well, did they order?" "The 82 Petrus," Madeleine said. Philip's eyes widened. Good. Don't mess this up, Hart. The owner is watching." Madeleine retrieved the bottle from the cellar. The dusty glass felt heavy. As she walked back toward the dining room, she realized she had a choice. She could continue to be the ghost they thought she was. Or she could listen. Really listen. Because she didn't just speak 6 languages. She understood the nuance, the slang, and the whispers that men used when they thought no one could hear them. When Madeleine returned to the table, the atmosphere had shifted. The appetizers had arrived, caviar and oysters, but the men were ignoring the food. They were huddled closer, their voices dropped to a murmur. She approached silently, the bottle of Petrus cradled in her arm. She began the ritual of presenting the label to the host. Omar waved a dismissive hand. "Pour it." As she worked the corkscrew, the conversation resumed. This time, however, they left the European languages behind. Omar leaned in toward a man sitting across from him, a silent, intense figure who hadn't spoken yet. This man, introduced only as the consultant, looked different. Harder. Omar spoke in Russian. "The wiring is scheduled for midnight, Zurich time," Omar said, his Russian guttural and precise. "If the Americans trace the funds to the shell company in Cyprus, we are all finished." Madeleine froze for a fraction of a second. The cork popped softly. Wire transfers. Cyprus. Midnight. The consultant replied in Russian, his voice like gravel. "The algorithm is ready. It will wash the money through 3 different crypto exchanges before it hits the bank." But the girl, the journalist, she's still a problem. Madeleine poured a small amount of wine into Omar's glass for the tasting. Her hand was steady, but her blood had turned to ice. They were talking about laundering money, and they were talking about silencing a journalist. Omar swirled the wine, watching the legs run down the glass. He switched languages again, this time to Mandarin Chinese, addressing the man on his far right, a technology investor. If she publishes the story about the environmental impact reports being faked, Omar said in Mandarin, the stock crashes before the acquisition. We lose everything. She won't publish, the investor replied in Mandarin. We have leverage. Her sister lives in Hong Kong. We sent a message. Madeleine felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't just white-collar crime. This was extortion and physical threats. She filled the glasses around the table, moving clockwise. She knew the journalist they were talking about. It had to be Sarah Jenkins, the investigative reporter for the New York Times, who had been digging into Al-Hassan's empire for months. Madeleine had followed her blog. As she finished pouring, Omar looked up at her. He seemed bored, looking for a new form of entertainment. He tapped the table with his ring, a massive sapphire. Tell me, Omar said in English, his voice dripping with mock politeness. What is your name? Madeleine, sir. Madeleine, he repeated, savouring the syllables as if they were a joke. Do you enjoy your work, Madeleine? Carrying things for your betters? It is honest work, sir, she replied, keeping her gaze fixed on the tablecloth. Omar laughed. He turned to his friends. Honest work, how quaint. Then he did something unexpected. He pulled a thick wad of cash from his jacket pocket, $100 bills held together by a gold clip. He tossed it onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud next to the butter dish. There is $5,000 there, Omar said. I will give it to you right now. All you have to do is tell us what we were just talking about. The table went silent. Robert smirked. Giovanni leaned forward, eager for the humiliation. They knew she couldn't understand. It was a cruel game, dangling a life-changing amount of money in front of a working-class woman, mocking her ignorance. Go on, Omar urged. We were speaking French, Italian, German, Russian, Mandarin. Surely you caught a word? Money? Wine? Madeleine looked at the money. $5,000. It would pay for 2 months of her father's care. It was right there. I wouldn't want to intrude, sir, she stammered, playing the part. Intrude? Omar scoffed. You are furniture, Madeleine. Furniture cannot intrude. I am offering you a gift, but you cannot take it, can you, because you are uneducated. You are simple. He looked at his friends. This is the difference between us and them. It is not just money. It is the mind. They live in a small world. We own the world. Something inside Madeleine snapped. It was a quiet snap, like a dry twig in a winter forest. It was the memory of her father, a brilliant diplomat, weeping in his chair after the stroke, unable to speak the languages he once loved. It was the memory of the long nights studying syntax and grammar until her eyes burned. It was the sheer, unadulterated arrogance of this man who thought wealth was a substitute for humanity. She placed the empty wine bottle on the serving tray. She adjusted her glasses. She looked up, and for the first time, she looked Omar directly in the eyes. Her eyes were green, sharp, and intelligent. The vacancy was gone. Is the offer genuine, Sheikh Al-Hassan? She asked. Her voice had changed. The submissive timbre was gone, replaced by a cool, academic precision. Omar blinked, surprised by the eye contact. Excuse me? The $5,000, Madeleine said, pointing to the stack. Is it a binding verbal contract? Robert laughed nervously. She wants the money. Cute. Yes, Omar said, his smile faltering slightly at her change in demeanor. If you can translate even one sentence of what we discussed, it is yours. Madeleine took a deep breath. She didn't just want the money. She wanted to burn them down. Very well, she said. She turned to Robert. Monsieur Robert, she began, her French flawless, her accent indistinguishable from a Parisian aristocrat. You are concerned about the German Regulatory Board for the Heidelberg acquisition. You have arranged for bribes disguised as lobbying fees to ensure the merger passes. Robert's jaw dropped. The fork fell from his hand, clattering onto the china. Madeleine didn't stop. She turned to Giovanni. Signore Giovanni, she continued, switching instantly to a lyrical, rapid Italian. You believe I am a ghost with no interior life. You find my existence amusing because you think I worry only about reality television while you discuss federal crimes in public. Giovanni went pale. He looked at Omar, panic rising in his chest. Madeleine turned to Omar. She switched to German. You ordered the Petrus, 1982, she said, her German crisp and commanding. But you also said it was worth more than my life. I would argue, Sheikh, that the value of a life is not measured in fermented grapes. The silence at the table was absolute. The background noise of the restaurant seemed to fade away. Other diners were glancing over, sensing the tension. But Madeleine wasn't finished. She looked at the consultant. And you, she said in Russian, her voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. You are washing funds through a shell company in Cyprus. The transfer is set for midnight Zurich time. You are using a crypto tumbler to hide the source. The consultant reached into his jacket, his eyes narrowing into slits. Madeleine turned back to Omar, delivering the final blow in Mandarin Chinese. And most importantly, Sheikh, she said, staring him down, you are threatening a journalist's family in Hong Kong to hide the fake environmental reports. That is not just business. That is blackmail? She stopped. She took a step back, her hands clasped politely in front of her. I believe that covers the last 10 minutes of conversation, she said, returning to English. Did I miss anything, sir? For 10 seconds, no one moved. Omar al-Hassan sat frozen, his cigar burning down to his fingers. The arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. He looked at the waitress, then at the money, then back at the waitress. He had been stripped naked in the middle of a crowded restaurant. Who are you? Omar whispered, his voice trembling with rage and fear. Madeleine smiled, a cold, thin smile. I'm just the furniture, sir. She reached out and picked up the stack of cash. She didn't count it. She simply slipped it into her apron pocket. Enjoy the Petrus, she said. I'll go get your check. I have a feeling you'll want to leave soon. She turned on her heel and walked away. But as she reached the kitchen doors, her heart was pounding so hard she thought she might faint. She had the money. She had the satisfaction. But she also knew she had just made a very powerful, very dangerous enemy, and she knew too much. As the kitchen door swung shut behind her, she didn't see Omar reaching for his phone. He wasn't calling his lawyer. He was calling security. Don't let her leave, Omar hissed into the phone, his eyes fixed on the kitchen door. I want to know who she is, and I want her silenced. Permanently. The swinging doors of the kitchen cut off the murmurs of the dining room, replacing them with the cacophony of a professional kitchen at peak hours. It was a world of shouting, clattering pans, and sizzling butter. Madeleine didn't stop at the service station. She walked straight past Philip, the maitre d', who was frantically punching an order into the POS system. Hart! Table 7 needs bread, Philip barked without looking up. I quit, Madeleine said. She didn't shout, but her voice cut through the noise with absolute finality. Philip froze. He spun around, his face flushing red. Excuse me, you can't quit in the middle of the Friday rush. We have the senator coming in at 8. Get back on the floor. I said I quit, Philip. My apron is in the locker. She kept moving, heading toward the staff locker rooms at the back of the building. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She could feel the weight of the $5,000 in her pocket. It felt radioactive. She knew she had perhaps 2 minutes before Omar or one of his lackeys came through those double doors. Men like Omar al-Hassan didn't let people walk away with their secrets. They certainly didn't let waitresses humiliate them. She reached her locker, her fingers trembling as she spun the combination dial. Left to 12, right to 34, left to 8. It jammed. "Come on," she hissed. She heard the kitchen doors burst open. The rhythm of the kitchen changed instantly. The shouting chefs fell silent. "Where is she?" a voice boomed. It wasn't Philip. It was the consultant. His voice was deep, accented, and carried the weight of a man who hurt people for a living. Madeline abandoned the locker. She didn't need her coat. She didn't need her purse. She had the cash, and she had her life. She grabbed her phone from the top shelf and shoved it into her bra, a habit from her days in conflict zones. She didn't go back through the kitchen. She turned toward the fire exit that led to the loading dock. It was alarmed, strictly for emergencies. "This is an emergency," she thought. She slammed the push bar. The alarm shrieked, a piercing, mechanical scream that echoed off the tiled walls. She burst out into the alleyway. The cool night air of New York City hit her face, smelling of wet asphalt and garbage. It was raining, a cold drizzle that slicked the cobblestones. She didn't run immediately. Running attracted attention. Instead, she stripped off her white apron and threw it behind a dumpster. She pulled the pins out of her hair, letting the dark waves fall around her face, softening her severe silhouette. She took off her thick-rimmed glasses and shoved them into her pocket. Without them, the world was slightly softer, but she didn't need 20/20 vision to navigate the streets of Manhattan. She knew this grid better than she knew the lines on her own hand. She walked briskly toward Fifth Avenue, merging with the crowd of tourists and theater-goers. As she turned the corner, she glanced at the reflection in a shop window. A black Escalade had just screeched to a halt at the mouth of the alleyway she had just exited. 2 men jumped out. One was the consultant. The other was a massive man she hadn't seen inside. Security detail. They were scanning the crowd. Madeline ducked her head and linked arms with an elderly couple walking in front of her, pretending to be their granddaughter for a split second to break her silhouette. "Excuse me, dear?" the old woman asked, startled. "So sorry, I thought I saw a friend," Madeline murmured, unlinking her arm and diving into the subway entrance at 53rd Street. She didn't use her Metro card. That could be tracked if they had her real name, and Philip certainly had her employment file. She vaulted the turnstile when the attendant wasn't looking, a move that surprised even her. It had been years since she had been this person, the Madeline Hart who had worked intelligence support in Geneva, the woman who knew how to disappear. She boarded a downtown E train just as the doors chimed. As the train rattled into the dark tunnel, Madeline slumped against the cold metal door. She closed her eyes. The adrenaline was starting to fade, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. She had played a dangerous game. She had wanted to hurt Omar for his arrogance, for the way he looked at her like she was nothing. But in doing so, she had painted a target on her back. The Cyprus transfer, midnight Zurich time, the journalist, Sarah Jenkins, the fake environmental reports. She had the pieces of the puzzle, but puzzle pieces were useless unless you could put them together before the house burned down. Her phone buzzed against her chest. She pulled it out. It was a text from an unknown number. "Furniture can be broken. We know where your father is." Madeline stared at the screen, her breath catching in her throat. How? How did they know so fast? Then she realized. Her employment application, emergency contact, Dr. Arthur Hart, Sunnyvale Memory Care Facility, Yonkers. The train screeched into the next station. Madeline didn't wait. She bolted off the train, sprinting up the stairs. She wasn't going home. She had to get to Yonkers. She had to get to her father before they did. The taxi ride to Yonkers cost her $200 of the bribe money. Madeline tipped the driver an extra $50 to drive fast and not ask why she was constantly looking out the rear window. The Sunnyvale Memory Care Facility was a depressing brick building on a hill, surrounded by oak trees that looked skeletal in the moonlight. It was a place where people were parked to be forgotten. Madeline burst through the front doors. The night nurse, a heavy-set woman named Brenda who spent most of her shift reading romance novels, looked up in surprise. "Madeline, it's past visiting hours, honey. Is everything okay?" "Where is he, Brenda?" Madeline asked, breathless. "Is he in his room?" "Of course. He's been asleep for hours. What's going on?" "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I need to take him. Now." Brenda stood up, dropping her book. "You can't just take a patient out at 10 o'clock at night. It's against protocol. You need discharge papers, a doctor's signature." "Brenda, listen to me," Madeline said, grabbing the nurse's hands. Her voice was intense, desperate. "There are men coming here, dangerous men. If I don't get him out in the next 5 minutes, they are going to hurt him to get to me. Please." Brenda looked at Madeline's eyes. She saw the raw fear there, but also the steel. She had known Madeline for 2 years, the dutiful daughter who visited 3 times a week, who paid the bills in cash, who read poetry to the old man who just stared out the window. "Room 304, Brenda whispered. "Take the back service elevator. My car is in the lot. It's the old Honda. Here are the keys." Madeline felt a sob rise in her throat. "Thank you. I promise I'll bring it back." "Just go," Brenda said, already reaching for the phone to unplug it. "I'll tell them the phone lines are down if anyone calls." Madeline ran. Room 304 smelled of antiseptic and lavender. Her father, Arthur, was a lump under the thin blankets. Once he had been a titan of diplomacy, a man who spoke 8 languages and negotiated treaties in the Middle East. Now he was a shell, hollowed out by early-onset dementia and the stroke that followed his public disgrace. "Dad," Madeline whispered, shaking his shoulder. "Dad, we have to go." Arthur blinked open his eyes. They were milky and confused. "Madeline, is it time for the gala? I haven't tied my tie." "Yes, Dad, it's time for the gala," she lied, her voice breaking. "We have to hurry. The ambassador is waiting." She pulled him up. He was frail, lighter than she remembered. She threw a coat over his pajamas and guided him into his slippers. They made it to the service elevator, just as headlights swept across the front lobby windows. High-intensity xenon lights, an SUV. "Faster, Dad," she urged, supporting his weight. "My speech," Arthur mumbled. "I forgot my speech on the rostrum." I have it right here." They reached the parking lot. The rain had turned into a downpour. Madeline shoved her father into the passenger seat of Brenda's rusted Honda Civic. She fumbled with the keys, her hands slick with rain and sweat. The engine sputtered and died. "Please," she begged the universe. "Not now." She turned the key again. The engine roared to life. She slammed it into reverse just as the front doors of the facility kicked open. 2 men in dark raincoats stepped out. They weren't police. They held themselves with military precision. One of them pointed toward the parking lot. Madeline didn't wait. She stomped on the gas. The Honda squealed out of the spot, fishtailing on the wet pavement. She aimed for the back exit, tearing through a flower bed and bouncing over the curb onto the main road. She drove for an hour, taking random turns, checking her mirrors every 3 seconds. She didn't stop until she reached a motel in New Jersey, a place so run down that the neon sign just buzzed MOL. She got a room, paying cash. She settled her father into the bed. He fell asleep instantly, Mumbling about the Treaty of Versailles, Madeleine sat on the floor by the window, peeking through the curtains. She was safe, for now. But she couldn't keep running. She had an old man with dementia and $4,000 left. That would last maybe 2 weeks. Omar al-Hassan had billions. He could wait her out. She needed leverage. She needed to turn the tables. She pulled out her phone. She knew she shouldn't use it, but she had no choice. She searched for Sarah Jenkins' New York Times. She found a secure tip-line email. Madeleine's fingers hovered over the keypad. She began to type. Subject: The Heidelberg Acquisition, Cyprus, midnight. To Sarah Jenkins: You don't know me, but I know about the environmental reports. I know about the algorithm. I know about the threats to your sister in Hong Kong. I was in the room when Omar al-Hassan confessed to it all. I am the witness you need. But I need protection. Meet me. Come alone. She hit send. Then she took the battery out of the phone and flushed the SIM card down the toilet. The next morning, the world looked grey and hostile. Madeleine left her father watching cartoons, the only thing that seemed to calm him, and walked to a diner across the street to use the payphone. She called the number she had memorized from Sarah Jenkins's website, a direct line for urgent sources. It rang twice. Jenkins, a voice answered. It was sharp, tired, and sounded like it ran on too much coffee and cynicism. Did you get my email? Madeleine asked. There was a pause. I get a lot of emails. Who is this? The furniture, Madeleine said. I sent it at 2:15 a.m. About Heidelberg. The line went silent for a long moment. Then the voice changed. It became focused. You're the one. My editor thinks it's a prank. But you mentioned my sister. How do you know about my sister? Omar al-Hassan knows about your sister, Madeleine said. He knows where she lives. He knows her schedule. He was laughing about it last night while drinking an 82 Petrus. Where are you? Sarah asked immediately. Not yet, Madeleine said. I need to know you're not compromised. This story, it's big, Sarah. But it's not just corporate fraud. They are washing money for someone else, someone the consultant called the architect. The consultant? Sarah asked. You mean Viktor Volkov, the ex-KGB cyber specialist? Madeleine felt a chill. Is that his name? Volkov? If Volkov is involved, you are in over your head, Sarah said, her voice dropping. He's not a fixer. He's a cleaner. He doesn't leave loose ends. He's trying to find me, Madeleine said. I have my father with me. He's sick. I can't run forever. Listen to me, Sarah said. There is a safe house in Brooklyn. It's off the books. My paper uses it for whistleblowers. If you can get there, I can get you private security. I can get you a lawyer. I don't need a lawyer, Madeleine said, her voice hardening. I need a microphone. I speak 6 languages, Sarah. I can translate the documents. I can decipher the codes they used. But I need you to promise me something. What? If I give you this story, if I give you Al-Hassan, you ensure my father gets care for the rest of his life, top tier, anonymous. I can't promise that. Then I hang up and I go to the FBI, and the Times loses the scoop of the decade. A pause. Okay, I promise. I'll make the arrangements. Meet me at the Brooklyn Public Library, the main branch at Grand Army Plaza. 3rd floor, history section. 2 hours. If I see anyone else, Madeleine said, I disappear. I'll be alone. Madeleine hung up. She walked back to the motel room, her mind racing. Volkov, the architect. She had stumbled into a web that was much larger than a greedy billionaire. She opened the door to the motel room. The room was empty. The bed was made. The TV was off. Her father was gone. On the pillow, there was a single object, a a pristine white linen napkin from l'Orangerie, folded into the shape of a swan. Madeleine fell to her knees, a silent scream tearing through her chest. They hadn't tracked her phone. They hadn't tracked the car. They had tracked her. She unfolded the napkin. Inside, written in elegant calligraphy with a fountain pen, was a message in French. "We have the old man. If you want him to remember his name one last time, bring the money. And your tongue. Come home to the restaurant. Tonight. Midnight." Madeleine stared at the note. The fear evaporated. In its place, a cold, dark rage settled in her stomach. They had taken the only thing she had left. She stood up. She went to the bathroom sink and splashed cold water on her face. She looked at herself in the mirror. The waitress was gone. The frightened daughter was gone. She took the remaining cash from her pocket. She wasn't going to the library. She wasn't going to Sarah Jenkins. Not yet. She was going shopping. She needed a dress. She needed a weapon. And she needed to brush up on her Russian. If Omar wanted a show at midnight, she was going to give him one. Madeleine stood in the fitting room of a boutique on Madison Avenue, staring at her reflection. The dress was a deep, blood-red silk. Structured and severe, it cost $3,000, an absurd expense for a woman on the run. But Madeleine wasn't buying clothing. She was buying armor. Tonight, she could not walk into l'Orangerie as a waitress. She needed to walk in as a threat. "It fits perfectly," the sales assistant said. "I'll wear it," Madeleine replied. "Throw the other clothes away." She left the store and purchased a digital voice recorder the size of a stick of gum and a single Bluetooth earbud. Then, finding a quiet corner in a hotel lobby, she dialed Sarah Jenkins. "You didn't show up," Sarah snapped. "Do you want to die?" "They have my father," Madeleine said, her voice steady. The panic of the morning had distilled into a cold, hard focus. "They want me at the restaurant at midnight." "It's a trap, Madeleine. Viktor Volkov doesn't negotiate. He liquidates." "I know. That's why I'm not going in to negotiate. I'm going in to burn them down. But I need you to be the match." "What do you need?" "I'm going to call you 5 minutes before midnight and leave the line open. Record everything. Have the police on standby, but don't send them in until I give the signal." "What's the signal?" "When I order dessert," Madeleine said grimly. "Madeleine, this is suicide. You're a linguist, not a spy." "That's where you're wrong, Sarah. Language is espionage. It's about decoding intent and controlling the narrative. Omar al-Hassan thinks he speaks 6 languages. Tonight I'm going to teach him that he doesn't even know how to speak." She hung up and headed to a public library. Using a guest pass, she didn't look up escape routes. She looked up the past. She dug into the dark web forums her father had once monitored, connecting the Cyprus shell companies to a larger entity, the Architect, a Zurich-based financier who didn't just launder money but engineered corporate collapses. He was a ghost, and if Al-Hassan was working with him, Al-Hassan was terrified of him. Madeleine memorized the names, dates, and account numbers. She built a mental map of their crimes, sharpened her syntax, and rehearsed her vocabulary. At 11:30 p.m., she applied a coat of dark red lipstick. She pulled her hair back into a sleek, high ponytail and put her glasses back on. They were her trademark, but now they didn't hide her eyes. They framed them. She hailed a taxi. L'Orangerie. As the city blurred past, she thought of her father, the man who taught her that the most dangerous person in the room is the one who knows what the enemy fears. She touched the recorder, taped to the small of her back. "Showtime," she whispered. The restaurant was a tomb of shadows, illuminated only by the amber glow of a single dimmed chandelier. The silence was heavy, broken only by the hum of the ventilation system. Madeline pushed open the unlocked front door. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, a deliberate, rhythmic sound that announced her arrival not as a servant, but as an adversary. She walked into the main dining room, the blood-red silk of her dress rustling softly, her spine rigid with a terrifying calm. They were waiting. Omar Al-Hassan sat at the head of the center table, a tumbler of scotch in his hand. He looked exhausted, his eyes rimmed with the red of stress and alcohol. To his right stood Viktor Volkov, the consultant. The massive Russian held a suppressed pistol loosely at his side, his posture that of a coiled spring. And there, tied to a wooden chair on the left, was Arthur. Her father looked small in his oversized coat. His hands were bound with plastic zip ties. He blinked at Madeline, smiling pleasantly, completely untethered from the violent reality of the room. "Madeline," Arthur chirped. "There you are. The service here is terrible. I've been waiting for my soup for hours." Madeline's heart fractured, but her expression didn't flicker. "Hello, Dad," she said softly. "The soup is coming." She stopped 10 feet from the table, standing tall in the center of the room. She adjusted her glasses, magnifying the cold intelligence in her eyes. Omar stared at her, disoriented. He was looking for the invisible mouse in the white uniform. Instead, he saw a lioness. "You cleaned up," Omar sneered, setting his glass down hard. "I almost didn't recognize the help." "I quit," Madeleine said, her voice projecting clearly. "So I'm technically a guest. I believe the kitchen is closed, Omar, so I won't be taking your order." Volkov took a step forward, raising the gun slightly. "She is arrogant. Let me finish it." Omar held up a hand. "No, not yet. I want to understand. I want to know how a waitress knows about Cyprus. Who are you working for? The FBI? Interpol? Or are you corporate espionage?" "I work for l'Orangerie," Madeline said. "Or I did. Until you decided to turn my workplace into a money laundering facility." "You stole from me," Omar hissed, standing up. "You embarrassed me." "I listened to you," Madeline corrected. "There is a difference. You were loud. You were careless. You thought that because I served your food, I didn't have a brain. That is a common mistake among men who inherit their money rather than earn it." Omar's face twisted in rage. He lunged forward, striking out with a backhanded slap that caught Madeline across the cheek. The sound was a sharp crack in the silent room. Madeline's head snapped to the side. Her glasses skewed on her nose. The taste of copper filled her mouth. She didn't cry out. She didn't fall. Slowly, deliberately, she moved her hand to adjust her glasses. She looked back at him, and she smiled. It was a bloody, terrifying smile. "Is that the best you can do?" she asked softly. "I expected more from a billionaire. That felt middle management," Volkov growled. "She is stalling, Omar." "I am not stalling," Madeline said, shifting her gaze to the Russian. She switched languages instantly. Her Russian was perfect, archaic and formal, the language of intellectuals, not gangsters. "I am giving you a chance to walk away, Viktor Volkov," she said in Russian, "before the architect finds out you compromised the operation." Volkov froze. The name hit him like a physical blow. His eyes widened, the gun wavering for the first time. "How do you know that name?" Volkov rasped in Russian. "I know about the Zurich accounts," Madeline lied, weaving the threads of information she had memorized from the dark web files. "I know about the failing environmental sensors. But mostly, I know that the architect does not tolerate loose ends. And right now, Omar is a loose end. And you are the hired muscle who let a waitress overhear the entire plan." She took a step toward the gunman, pressing the advantage. "Do you think the architect will pay you?" she continued. Or do you think he will erase you to cut the link to Omar? You remember Grozny in 2004. You remember what happened to the team that failed him there. It was a gamble, a reference she'd found in a redacted file. But it landed. Volkov paled. Doubt, the most powerful weapon in her arsenal, had entered the room. Omar looked between them, panic rising. He didn't speak Russian. He saw his enforcer hesitating, saw the fear in the giant's eyes. "What is she saying?" Omar screamed. "Victor, shoot her!" "Wait," Volkov said in English, his voice tight. "She knows too much." "I know everything," Madeleine said, switching back to English to address Omar. "I know that you are leveraged to the hilt. If this merger fails, you don't just lose money. You lose the family trust. You become nothing. And that is why you are so desperate that you hired a butcher like Volkov." She walked over to the table and poured herself a glass of water from the pitcher she had used the night before. Her hand was steady. "Here is the situation," Madeleine said. "I have sent a dossier to 3 different parties. One is a journalist, one is the SEC, and the third went directly to the compliance officer at the bank, handling your wire transfer in Zurich." "You're lying," Omar said, but his voice cracked. "Am I?" Madeleine pulled the burner phone from her clutch. "Midnight, Zurich time. That was 20 minutes ago. Check your phone, Omar. Did the transfer go through, or is it frozen?" It was a massive bluff. She hadn't contacted the bank, but she knew men like Omar lived in constant terror of the house of cards falling. Omar scrambled for his phone on the table. He unlocked it with trembling fingers, opening his banking app. He stared at the screen, the color draining from his face. It's processing," he whispered. "It's stuck." Likely just a network delay, but to a paranoid mind, it was confirmation of doom. "It's over," Madeleine said ruthlessly. "The authorities are already freezing your assets. The police are on their way. You have 2 choices. You can kill us, guarantee life in prison, and die a pauper. Or what?" Omar asked, looking at her with the desperation of a drowning man. "Or you let us walk out," Madeleine said. "You blame Volkov. You tell the police he was extorting you. You turn state's witness against the architect. You might lose your money, Omar, but you'll keep your life." She was sowing division, pitting the master against the dog. Volkov understood instantly. He turned on Omar, his face contorted with fury. "She is playing you," Volkov roared. "There is no dossier. She is a waitress." "Check the transfer, Victor," Omar shouted back, sweating profusely. "It's frozen. She did it." "I am not going to jail for you," Volkov snarled. He raised the gun, not at Madeleine, but at Omar. The dynamic of the room shifted violently. The predators were turning on each other. "Dad," Madeleine said calmly, amidst the shouting. "Stand up." Arthur stood up, blinking. "Is the soup ready?" "We're leaving, Dad." Madeleine grabbed a steak knife from the table. She moved behind her father and began sawing through the plastic zip ties. Volkov and Omar were screaming at each other now. Omar was offering money. Volkov was shouting about betrayal and the architect. "You idiot!" Volkov yelled. "If she talked to the bank, the architect knows. We are both dead." Volkov turned back to Madeleine, his eyes filled with a cold, final resolution. He realized the only way to survive was to eliminate all witnesses and flee the country. "Nice try, girl," Volkov said, leveling the pistol at Madeleine's chest. "But I don't leave witnesses." Madeleine froze. The bluff had worked on Omar, but Volkov was a professional. He had done the math, and the math said, "Kill everyone." "Sarah!" Madeleine screamed at the phone in her pocket. "Desert! Now!" Crash! The front window of l'Orangerie shattered inward, raining glass across the floor. A canister skidded across the marble, hissing violently. Thick white smoke erupted, filling the room in seconds. "Get down!" Madeline yelled, pulling Arthur under the heavy oak table. Gunshots rang out, wild, blind fire from Volkov. Bullets chewed into the wood of the table above their heads. Thud, thud, thud. "Stay down, Dad," Madeline coughed, her eyes stinging. Through the broken window, shadows moved with lethal precision. They weren't wearing police uniforms. They were clad in dark tactical gear, moving like ghosts through the smoke. Madeline peered out. She saw Volkov firing toward the window, panic making him sloppy. Then a red laser dot appeared on his chest. Foot, a single suppressed shot. Volkov dropped like a stone. Omar screamed, dropping to his knees, his hands in the air. "Don't shoot! I surrender! I am Sheikh Omar al-Hassan!" The figures ignored him. They moved past the billionaire as if he were furniture. They were coming for the table. They were coming for Madeline. A man in a gas mask leaned down and looked under the table. He reached out a gloved hand. "Madeline Hart?" a modulated voice asked. Madeline gripped the steak knife, her knuckles white. "Who are you?" "We're not the police," the man said. "Sarah Jenkins sends her regards. But we're actually here for your father. We're the extraction team." Madeline hesitated. Extraction team? Sarah was a journalist. This was military-grade execution. "Come with us if you want to live," the man said urgently. "The architect has sent a second team. They are 2 minutes out." The architect. Madeline realized with a jolt of horror that she hadn't just exposed a crime. She had kicked a hornet's nest so large she couldn't see the edges of it. She wasn't just fighting Omar anymore. She had started a war. She grabbed Arthur's hand. "Let's go, Dad." They crawled out from under the table, leaving Omar weeping on the floor next to the corpse of his hitman. As Madeline ran toward the broken window, stepping over the glass in her ruined red dress, she realized one thing. She wasn't a waitress anymore. She was a player. The extraction was a blur of efficiency. Madeline and Arthur were hustled through the shattered window and shoved into an idling black armored van, just as NYPD cruisers swept around the corner. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing them in a dim interior lit by blue tactical lights. "Get in," the team leader ordered. He removed his gas mask, revealing a man with a jagged scar running down his neck. "Who are you?" Madeline demanded, adrenaline still spiking in her veins. "Sarah Jenkins doesn't have a paramilitary budget." "No," the man said, looking at her with recognition. "We ensure history happens correctly. My name is Bishop. I used to work for your father." Madeline looked down at Arthur, who was calmly inspecting a button on his coat, humming a quiet tune. "My father was a diplomat. He stamped visas." Bishop's smile was dry and humorless. "Is that what he told you?" Arthur Hart was the station chief for the Babel Group. "We didn't just translate threats, we intercepted the code words that started wars." The van sped toward Teterboro Airport. Madeline felt the floor shift beneath her. Her entire life, the childhood in Geneva, the relentless language drills, the strict memorization of syntax, suddenly reframed itself. "He wasn't just teaching me French and Mandarin," she whispered. "He was training me." "He was building a fail-safe," Bishop corrected. At the tarmac, a sleek private jet waited, engines whining. Sarah Jenkins stood by the stairs, shivering in a trench coat. "Madeline," Sarah said, rushing forward as they exited the van. "I didn't know they would interfere. When you called, my phone was tapped. Not by the bad guys. By them." She gestured to Bishop. "We've been monitoring Arthur for years," Bishop explained, stepping onto the tarmac, waiting for the architect to make a move. "We needed bait to draw Volkov out. You performed admirably, Madeline. You broke Omar al-Hassan without firing a shot." Arthur stepped out of the van. The wind whipped his thin white hair, but as he looked up at the jet, the fog of dementia seemed to clear. His posture straightened. The confused old man vanished, replaced by the ghost of the titan he once was. "Bishop," Arthur said, his voice clear and strong. "Is the bird fueled?" "Yes, sir. Flight plan filed for Zurich." Madeline stared. "Dad? You know what's happening?" Arthur turned to her. His eyes were still milky, but a fierce intelligence burned behind them. He reached out and cupped her face. "I have good days and bad days, Maddie. But tonight I had to be awake. For you." "You knew?" she asked, tears welling. "About the training? About everything?" "The architect isn't just a money launderer," Arthur said. "He was my counterpart in the East, a man who believes chaos is a ladder. I stole a ledger from him 20 years ago. The names of every politician, judge, and CEO he owns." "Where is it?" Madeline asked. "Is that why they kidnapped you?" Arthur tapped her temple. "It's here." "What?" "I didn't hide the ledger in a safe," Arthur said. "I wove it into your lessons. The irregularities in the Mandarin syntax, the strange vocabulary lists in Russian, the numeric sequences in the German poetry. It's a code, Madeline. You are the ledger. You are the living record of the world's corruption." Madeline reeled back. The weight of it was crushing. She wasn't just a linguist. She was a weapon. "That's why I couldn't tell you," Arthur whispered, fatigue creeping back into his voice. "To keep you safe until you were ready. And tonight, seeing you in that restaurant, you are ready." Bishop stepped forward. "The architect knows Volkov failed. He will burn his entire network to get to you now. You can't stay in New York." Madeline looked at the distant Manhattan skyline. She thought of the rude customers, the invisibility, and the $5,000 in her pocket, the first spoil of her war. She looked at Sarah. "What will you write?" "The truth," Sarah said. "The financial fraud, the collapse of the Al-Hassan Empire. Omar will go to prison. But the spy games, that stays off the record." Madeline handed Sarah the voice recorder. "Omar's confession, and Volkov admitting to the murders. Make sure it hurts them." Sarah took it like a holy relic. "Thank you." Madeline turned back to the jet. "Where are we going?" "Zurich," Bishop said. "To the source. We're going to use the code inside your head to drain the architect's accounts. We're going to bankrupt the most dangerous man in the world." Madeline took a deep breath. She adjusted her glasses, smoothing the ruined red silk of her dress. The fear had burned away in the restaurant. "I speak 6 languages," Madeline said, her voice cutting through the wind. "Let's go teach the architect a lesson in all of them." She guided her father up the stairs. The invisible woman of Fifth Avenue was dead. In her place stood Madeline Hart, the keeper of the Babel Protocol. As the jet soared into the night sky, banking toward the Atlantic, Madeline smiled. It was just the beginning. The fall of the Al-Hassan Empire dominated the news cycle for months. It was the scandal of the decade. A billionaire caught laundering money for global syndicates, exposed by a whistleblower who vanished into thin air. Omar al-Hassan was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. He spent his days in a cell, screaming that he had been set up by a ghost, a waitress who spoke in tongues. No one believed him. Madeline Hart was never seen in New York again. L'Orangerie eventually reopened, but the staff spoke in hushed whispers about the night the windows shattered, and the quiet girl with the glasses walked out into the smoke. Somewhere in Europe, in a sun-drenched villa overlooking Lake Como, an old man sits in a garden, listening to opera. Beside him sits a woman in a red dress, reading the Financial Times. She spots a headline about a sudden, unexplained bankruptcy of a Zurich-based holding company. She smiles, folds the paper, and asks the waiter for water. "Acqua frizzante, per favore," she says, because words have power, and she knows how to use them all. And that is the story of Madeline Hart, the waitress who didn't just serve dinner, but served justice cold. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? The person pouring your coffee, the quiet driver, the janitor in the hallway. Do we really know who they are? Or are we just too arrogant to look them in the eye? Madeline had a choice. She could have taken the $5,000 and stayed silent. She could have stayed safe. But she chose the truth, even when it cost her everything she knew. What would you have done? If a billionaire threw $5,000 at you to shut up, would you take it? Or would you burn his world down? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, intellect, and twists, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. We have a new thriller coming next week that you won't believe. Thanks for watching, and remember, never underestimate the quiet ones.